Um, so basically, I think you got a chance to quickly read the email I sent
Hmm.
about 20 minutes ago, just saying the objectives of my research.
Hmm.
So if you can just start by telling me, we kind of talked about it a little bit last time, and I was taking some notes on how you first heard about food forests, got involved with that, and any of the ones that you happen to be working on in San Francisco.
Sure. Yeah, so like we discussed, my introduction to the concept of food forests came through my study and engagement with permaculture design. And my teachers, Penny Livingston, Brock Dolman, David Holmgren, Jeff Lawton, all of whom mentioned and described kind of the notion of food forest as a technique of agroforestry, as a technique of perennial polyculture production of food. And so that was my introduction to the concept of food forests. And as I think we had some discussion about last time we chatted, in San Francisco proper, the city of San Francisco, we have some installations, some sites that are perennial polyculture kind of gardens, non-market
Hmm.
but food security garden scale um, activities and sites, implementations, and I personally would not call them a food forest, but other people do. And so there's the 18th and Rhode Island Permaculture Garden
Hmm.
in Picaro Hill at the corner of 18th and Rhode Island. It's a 5,000 square foot double lot corner lot, and that has 70 fruit trees, an understory of perennial vegetables, um, mixed in with a number of support species, medicinal species, and some annual and reseeding annual type of production in different places, and a number of other kind of demonstrations of permaculture principles. And then there's a street park, a community maintained open space adjacent to some residential properties on Mount Davidson in San Francisco called Bengal Alley,
Yeah.
and some people call that a food forest. There is a tremendous amount of, in a dense, small space, a lot of productive species, fruit trees and soft fruit, cane and bush fruit, and lots of other perennial and annual vegetables growing there as well. Kind of a similar implementation of an edible landscape. I would hesitate to call either of those forests, um, but they are in the spirit of the popular notion of food forest. Some people are referring to them as that.
I think when we talked last time, you were mentioning that to you a food forest would be larger scale. Is that
Hmm.
why you hesitate to call them food forests?
Yeah, I mean, for in my own jargon, my own kind of understanding of the term, when I think of a forest, I think of a certain size of instead rather than a collection of trees and understory and ground cover and a collection of species, let's say 70, 50 fruit trees and this kind of thing. I don't think of that as a forest, even if it is relatively low maintenance or semi self-sustaining as a ecosystem that's emerging, a small ecosystem. Uh, I tend to think of forests as larger entities, larger ecotones. And I'm not an ecologist or biologist by training, so I don't know what if there even is a technical definition of forest. But
No, I
I
mean,
tend to,
sorry if
yeah,
there is.
you
I've
tell
been
me.
looking into that, but
Yeah.
I think in the sense I've taken it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you have more of the background in permaculture training, that when people use forest, I was thinking they were using it to basically explain the different layers that they are trying to mimic from a
Hmm.
forest structure,
Hmm.
not necessarily an entire forest ecosystem.
Hmm.
Would you agree with that, or do you see it differently?
Well, subtly, I think the my understanding of the food forest is the concept, especially as again, we talked about some of the terminology. You have J. Russell Smith and kind of a permanent agriculture and kind of tree agroforestry type of stuff from the, oh, I don't know, the 20s or 30s, sometime in the
Yeah.
20th century. He wrote that, and him studying the Corsican chestnut forests. These are planted trees, hundreds of centuries old trees in the Mediterranean area, and there's thousands of them, entire mountainsides covered in this kind of passively, semi-passive, but actively maintained. Passive meaning low maintenance, but active interaction with the human settlement. And J. Russell Smith drew a lot of inspiration from that, and permaculture as a pedagogy and as a term drew a lot of inspiration from J. Russell Smith and many others. And so this idea of like a food production system that leverages the pattern of a forest for production, an overstory, an understory, a shrub layer, a ground cover, binding layer, and roots and so forth. That notion of looking at the forest as a pattern, but changing the speciation of a forest to be one that is food producing or productive for food, fuel, fiber, medicine, this kind of thing. That the idea of the pattern of a forest is my understanding. And in that sense, is there a scale dependency? I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's clear to anybody.
Yeah.
Advocate for something along the line. I mean, a food forest to me is more along the lines of what I'd see at a farm scale or a kind of significant acreage. Whether the food is for food security or going to market is not important per se, but like something that's large and has kind of the self-maintaining nature of a forest. Even if there's a necessary human interaction, it's not the same type of interaction we find at the 18th and Rhode Island permaculture garden, where there is, for example, irrigation, and there is, for example, a certain amount of composting and annual planting of seedlings and saving seed and so forth. Some of those activities. A forest, and again, you might have the academic terminology more clearer to me. Is more self-maintaining than that. Nobody actually irrigates the forest.
Right.
So
I was looking into the origins of the word forest the other week, trying to, come to terms with where I stand with this a little bit better. It was just interesting that that word comes from Old English, which actually means any of the woods that were, maintained for hunting. So there was definitely some sort of interaction with humans for where forest technically comes from.
yeah.
But then you find other definitions that just means an area that has a lot of trees.
Yeah,
So,
what's a forest? What's a woodland?
yeah. And that's where, I was looking at garden too and thinking, this is this seems small, but I think as these become more popular, it actually will have more meaning to be able to say to people, this is a forested garden, which
Hmm.
means you are having some sort of interaction with it, and the sole production isn't just for food, it's potentially fiber
Yeah,
and everything else that would signify garden. Or if it is strictly for food security, is calling it a food forest fine, because they're kind of mimicking the structure and the primary objective is food. So I'm still working with that and kind
yeah,
of doing what you're saying, looking at what is the understanding of forest. There's also those like restorative benefits that people get from going into a forest,
right, right.
and also a garden, but that ties into what people are calling them.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, if you had to put a name on what's happening at 18th and Rhode Island, what would you call it then?
My bias would be to call it a perennial polyculture garden or perennial polyculture edible landscape, even.
Hmm.
There is a strong emphasis on low maintenance, very low maintenance, and so it almost exists as a landscape with where instead of incidental habitat forming vegetation. The vegetation is purposefully designed to be edible or useful or productive for human needs, and requires a certain amount of interaction and maintenance for harvest and mulching and so forth. But yeah, so perennial polyculture, edible landscape, perennial polyculture garden, because there is a strong emphasis on perennials, and I guess perennial polyculture garden, or yeah, permaculture design garden, or yeah, perennial polyculture garden would probably be a little bit of a mouthful, but that's probably what I'd call it.
Yeah, maybe that's the other part is that people just think they like the sound of food forests and
I think so. I
popular
think
notion.
that's what we're finding. It's like
Yeah,
people have asked us to rename that garden as a food forest, which we
really.
might we might do just because it's more popularly accessible. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I find both. I find people that get a little bit confused by the term still, but it's catching. It's like
Hmm.
catching on, and like this is the formative part where, I think
Hmm.
helping people to understand what it means is just going to go forward from here. Like if food forest sticks, people are going to get used to saying that. But um, so who's mainly involved in the 18th in Rhode Island? The Urban Permaculture Institute that you've helped start?
That's right. The Urban Permaculture Institute of San Francisco runs classes at the 18th and Rhode Island Garden and coordinates a volunteer work schedule for people who want to play and contribute service to the garden. There's a strong contingent of nearby neighbors
Hmm.
who are essentially the primary stewards, the day-to-day stewards, the people with their eyes on it most regularly, neighbors across the street and neighbors nearby, and so it's a coordinated, sometimes loosely, sometimes more well orchestrated effort by directly adjacent neighbors, and then the permaculture community-based organization, the San Francisco Permaculture Guild, and the Urban Permaculture Institute. Those are the main kind of people involved. There's another population that's involved in the maintenance, and is the people who pass by it, going to the local food dispensaries, the soup kitchens, and food pantries. And it sits between two of them, the garden, if
Hmm.
you walk up a block. And so there are people who pick up food and will actually walk by the garden as part of their traffic pattern and actually participate in the harvest and the gleaning. And most of the fruit, especially, goes to just people passing by.
Oh, nice. Good.
Yeah.
So you see people harvesting.
We do. We do. We've seen hundreds of people, hundreds of different unique individuals harvesting from that garden since we established it. Yeah.
When was it established?
2009, really, yeah, starting October 2008,
Okay, like a year
and
of
was
preparing the ground and getting it ready for planting?
it
Or
was
just,
done in a very accelerated fashion. We did a robust sheet mulch with over a foot of cardboard donated from the grocer down the street, and then over 4 feet, covering the entire 4 feet deep,
oh wow.
of free woody mulch, covering the 5,000 square feet, and that was all implemented over the period of 4 or 5 months. And over just the years, and even that season, it was broken down. The wood mulch was a fine mulch fines, and we used some strategic compost and put the trees in the subsoil and put in some irrigation infrastructure for establishment. And yeah, we were producing food in the first year. 1,500 pounds of food. Pounds
Oh,
is
great.
not the best proxy for nutrition, but we were able to produce, I thought, a substantial amount of high quality organic produce, just even even in 2009.
Are you
Um,
guys recording the yields every season?
we are, though, not as diligent as we'd like to be. Part of the tension there is a mandate for enabling passive harvest. And
Hmm.
so a lot of people come by and glean, and we don't capture that measurement.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot of estimate work that goes into the yield. It's fully open to the public at any time, and
Okay.
so we have to estimate quite a bit. So I would not scientifically submit any of our
Yeah.
measurements. Mhm.
No, that's just something I've been curious with. You know, a main motive behind these is food security. Um, but it's
How productive are they?
yeah, exactly. And the problem is what you just posed, that they're supposed to be open to the public for free harvest, and
Yeah.
that's obviously difficult to keep track of then.
Yeah.
It's not something I think I can tackle. It's just a question I find
Well, you
interesting.
can. We have an
Would they
experiment.
help? So,
We have an experiment we have that we haven't implemented, but for what it's worth, if you as you talk to other people around the country, I'd love to know as well if this might work. We have an idea. We're going to put up a multilingual set of signs, multi-language signage, and set up a hanging scale in a covered place that's really visible.
mm-hmm.
And 4 out of 5 of us think the scale is going to disappear within a week, but we're going to give it a try
Yeah.
and see if people develop that habit
I wonder if
of measuring.
scale wouldn't even work, if just being able to leave an accessible notebook that people can at least jot down, I
Mm.
took
Yeah,
10 apples or this.
right.
That's what we used to do in a community greenhouse we did, and it was just kind of honor system that people would record. But,
Hmm.
but yeah, so far that's the first idea I've heard of for recording yields at all, so you'll have to keep me posted too on how that goes.
Sure. Okay.
Um, I'm interested in how you said the neighborhood, you have some people that are kind of responsible for looking over it. How did you first get those people engaged? That they're not part of the permaculture guild or the institute, they're just part of the community and they help take care of it?
Our video connection is a little choppy, but I think I got the question. So the community, how do we first engage? If you can hear me, I'll use that as the question. There's two. This is a very visible corner lot, and so we had a lot of interest just of people seeing us on the site and coming and talking to them. We did, and then we had a permaculture class, kind of commensurate with the initial implementation, right up the street at the Potrero Hill neighborhood. I want to make sure the
Yeah,
recording is capturing. It seems to be choppy.
it did get
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So, okay, I think I can ratchet down the bandwidth. Maybe that'll help. So the neighbor who took our permaculture class is friendly with and in relation with a number of the neighbors, and through his efforts of outreach and then our collective efforts of outreach, we've knocked on over 100 doors on multiple occasions, had gatherings on site, for example, of the dog walkers in the area, and solicited participation by some of the neighbors. For example, sponsor a tree, provide some funding or some commitments to maintenance, and we'll plant one of the fruit trees in your name, as a symbol, but also as a commitment. And that's how we've engaged the neighbors. The neighbors who are, I think, most regularly involved on the site are ones who live across the street, or who pass by it daily or every other day. Those are the ones who are most regularly involved from the neighbor perspective.
Was that originally public property, or I believe
That one is privately owned.
privately owned? Okay. Is it leased to you guys, or do you purchase?
We have a lease. We have an arrangement with the owner to utilize the land for growing food. Very, very generous owner. As you may or may not know, the real estate dynamics in San Francisco are extraordinarily exaggerated, even for the affluent world. So that lot could be sold for $2 million, just undeveloped. And the owner is a doctor and very passionate about public health and the issues of inequities, structural inequities. And he asked us to create a showcase of what permaculture could do to be of service in the world of providing healthy food. and that was part of the impetus and motivation. So it's a privately owned vacant lot, but we have an arrangement with the owner to be able to do this project.
Okay, that's great. Have you kept an eye on any of the other community food forests across the country?
Sure. The permaculture community is pretty close, so I know some of the people involved in the Beacon Hill project in Seattle, and I've gone up there to visit it actually. And here in California, there's again, the terminology of food forest is so kind of tricky, but
Yeah.
there's the California Rare Fruit Growers Association has a uh, polyculture orchard in San Jose at Emma Prush Park, which has been around for a number of years and really I think, a wonderful food forest, if you will. Those are some that come to mind. But we're tracking a few initiatives. One in Bloomington, Indiana.
Yeah.
Uh, we have a list somewhere on our
Have you heard
website.
of the?
Go ahead.
Oh, I'll have to check that list
Yeah.
out. Maybe I can add to it where we can collaborate there. But there's Pittsburgh that they have also been established for about 5 years and unfortunately just lost their lease.
Which one is it?
It's in Pittsburgh. It's called Hazelwood Food Forest.
Sure. Yeah. I heard of that one. Yeah.
And that's probably one of the favorite ones that I visited actually from this summer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of sad to hear, but hopefully they'll
Mm-hmm.
find new property.
Yeah.
But that doesn't sound like it's a situation you guys will run into.
Not in the near term. Even recently, one of the things that we did last year is help in a process initiated by some other people in San Francisco to change the California state law, California Law AB 551, which enables counties of a certain urbanized area scale, 200,000 people or more, to make changes to their assessment criteria for urban vacant lots of a certain size, between say 1/10 of an acre and 3 acres. And their assessment now, they can assess them at agricultural land values instead of residential land values, depending on how they're zoned. And so San Francisco, we helped San Francisco initiate legislation that is modeled, which was enabled by California AB 551. And in October, the city county of San Francisco passed the Agricultural Incentive Zones Act, and this last month, we applied and were accepted for 18th Rhode Island. It's the first one in California to be accepted as a site that enables the property owner to have his land value assessed at agricultural values, which is a pretty significant difference in his property tax assessment. So instead of paying $7,000 a year, his property tax bill will probably be something closer to $20 to $50.
Oh, that would be huge.
And so that's a big difference. But part of the requirement of the Urban Agricultural Incentive Zones Act is that he has to keep it in food production in urban agricultural activity for at least 5 years. So there's a minimum of 5 years. And knowing the owner, very generous man, very heart-centered, beautiful person, I think there's a likelihood that it'll be in productivity longer than that.
That's fantastic. Good. That's good to hear. Well, I want to be conscious of your time.
Sure.
You said, how much longer do you have here? A couple minutes?
I'd say 15 minutes tops. I was able to arrange things on texting while we were chatting. So.
Okay, well, let's wrap this up to not give you a couple extra minutes too. This has been helpful for me to have a better understanding of what's going on at 18th and Rhode Island, and I definitely would like to include it in my research. So that means, apart from talking to you, we've had our interview. That would go into part of the research. But I'd like to at least talk to 2 other people probably that are involved in the site, and I would probably go off of your recommendation on who you think the best people in leadership roles would be.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we could, once I get out of there, which will work with a schedule that will probably have to be starting sometime at the end of May on, and to look at
Mm-hmm.
the schedule that you guys have open, to do a video tour of the site once I get there, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
probably try to get the interviews out of the way by phone just so that there's more time available to see the site and do a group meeting once I'm there. Potentially
Sure.
the landowner if he's available. If he's a doctor, he's
Mm-hmm.
probably busy, but it'd be great to have him at the table. And maybe the neighbor that you talked about took your course and then help recruit people and get people engaged.
Mm-hmm.
To just have a couple different people at the table. And even though you and I've just discussed some of the like how it came about and the planning, I always find that when you have the group of people at the table, everyone kind of reviews it and you get more holistic picture
Yeah.
of the project, and it's probably helpful. It's usually helpful for the people involved to hear everybody's reflection, and then we kind of talk about best lessons during each of those different project management phases.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, typical project management would be closing a project down, but we're gonna and then look at future visions and talk about where people would like to see it go.
Sure.
So that's kind of the layout of what I do once I get to a site. Do you
Mm-hmm.
think could make that happen?
Pieces of that for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How does is May, June when things really start to get busy for you guys out there?
May and June is a good time.
Okay. So probably best if you can send me a calendar, even to July, May, June, July, like when the best times are for you guys. Because I'm
Mhm.
also, once I get out there, going to try to visit Humboldt,
Yep.
California, and any others in the area that you know, if I can hit a couple while I'm out there. You mentioned a few while we were talking. I'm not sure distance-wise how close some of those were.
Mm-hmm.
But I know there's Transition Humboldt and at least I think one other in the area that I saw, and I can't think of the name of it right now. Arcata,
Mm-hmm.
am I saying that right?
Arcata. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Arcata? I think there's
Mm-hmm.
something going on up there as well. But
Okay.
if you know of any others that I could contact people for in that area, that'd be super helpful.
Yeah. I do, and yeah, I know some people you probably could contact. And the idea is publicly accessible food forest, right?
Yeah, publicly accessible. There's been one or two that I've done that are more, stuck within a community, but it's still open to anybody passing through that community.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So basically, yeah, as long as people have free access and can go in,
Mm-hmm.
um, it doesn't matter if it's on public or private property, but I think you get the general
Mm-hmm.
idea.
Yep. There's a number of projects around. I'll try and send you a list and let you assess it.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to add today with like your thoughts about either where you see sort of this movement of food forests going for, or what do you think they can accomplish and why they're important?
Sure. Well, I think food forests are very important in the transformation of agriculture and food production at large. And in that sense, I think I'm talking about farm scale agroforestry technique, whether that's intercropping or contour strips of nitrogen fixing support species interplanted with other agricultural crops, whether it's mixed vegetables or cereals or pulses, as well as agroforestry, other agroforestry practices in general. The Dehesa type savanna food forest models, especially one that comes to mind farm scale is Mark Shepard's farm in Wisconsin, and some of the techniques for the savanna ecotone that he's advocating for and implementing in different places. That type of restorative or restoration agriculture, I think he's calling it. I see food forests being very important in the long tail transition of how agriculture is done at a large scale for food production, including staple crops and staple human nutrition, carbohydrates and proteins and fats and so forth. So I think there's really important silver pasture, this kind of thing. I think these are really important concepts that are slowly emerging, and that's where I see the movement really exploding. In the urban and peri-urban and suburban kind of segments, I see maybe there's showcase examples of food forests that are kind of living nurseries for germplasm of appropriate trees and where scion wood and other seedlings can happen. But I see a huge opportunity for what I would again, this may be the jargon, but more edible landscaping in general.
Hmm.
That's where I see food forests rather than contained on, oh, here's a food forest site. I am much more an advocate for of, hey, we're in the park, and it just so happens to be that in this urban park, all the incidental landscaping that used to be just for ornamental purposes is actually productive.
Hmm.
That's I think the huge opportunity in the urban area is to have productive landscapes kind of throughout the human settlement, so that there's really a blend. Everything is productive. It's a commons garden that's productive for everybody. Um, Kind of a very old idea to have this foraging commons.
Yeah, yeah. But it's I think it's gaining ground again because if you look at the evolution of how we use green spaces or even included green spaces in urban design, you know, everybody kind of moved out of the city. It was important to try to get some green space back into these urban environments, and now it's no longer sufficient for it to be just green space. And like
Yep.
you said, people want it to be functional and interactive, and so these older ideas are coming back into play. A sort of a new twist. But,
And that's where I hope this enthusiasm of Food Forest goes. Instead of trying to contain it in that 5,000 square foot site or that 4 acre site or whatever, starting to try to box it in like a community garden, actually have it break out of that mold and have us, society, kind of question the incidental landscaping in general. And
mhm.
I'm hopeful that that's the long tail on the dense human settlement front.
Okay. Well, I agree with you on that. So, I'll let you get going. Thanks a lot for making time for this today. I appreciate it, and I'll definitely be in contact more. Let me know again what dates you think are available, and if you could email any contacts you have, that would be helpful. And since you've helped me with technology today, however I can get a link to this, if it's on YouTube or anything like that, let me know.
I'll find out where it went once I hit stop broadcast here, and I'll send it to you.
Okay. Well, thanks, Kevin, again. I appreciate it, and I'll be in touch.
Okay, thanks, Kevin.
Bye.